and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Lynda Cohen Loigman is a graduate of Harvard College and Columbia Law School, and the author of 4 novels: The Two-Family House, a USA Today bestseller and a nominee for the Goodreads 2016 Choice Awards; The Wartime Sisters, a Woman's World Book Club pick and Real Simple Magazine Best Book of 2019; The Matchmaker's Gift, named a Best New Book by People Magazine and a Best Book of Fall by the New York Post, Parade Magazine, BuzzFeed, and Good Morning America; and The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern, her 4th novel, which is out now. Lynda grew up in Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and now lives in New York. Lynda Cohen Loigman, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited to talk with you about your brand new novel, perfect for fall reading, The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. Publishers Weekly says, in this poignant tale of late in life love, Loigman showcases her talent for transporting readers into recent history through lovingly researched details and a touch of magical whimsy. This is a charmer. Author Shelby Van Pelt says, mix equal parts humor, heart, and hope, and you'll get The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern, a sparkling ode to second chances. Author Sarah Addison Allen says The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern is full of keen historical details and just a whisper of magic. What a smart, quirky, utterly satisfying read. Author Sarah Penner says Lynda Cohen Loigman has done it again with The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern, a feel-good story brimming with twists, tinctures, and a few love spells gone wrong. And one more, author Natalie Jenner says, the happiest I have felt in years inside the world of a book. There are more, but we'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and chat with you. Yeah, it was kind of an embarrassment of riches with the blurbs. I asked a lot of, I mean, I don't know where I got the gall, but I just asked a lot of people, and that it had been a fun couple years, and I had met a lot of these people, and I just asked them, and I never thought they'd all say yes, and somehow they all said yes. And so I ended up with so many beautiful, beautiful, kind words from so many lovely people.
I think I know why they all said yes.
I don't know.
Well, what can you tell us? What can you tell us about this book, your latest?
So, when this story opens, Augusta Stern is on the brink of turning 80. She's on the cusp of her octogenarian time period, her octogenarian era, like the Taylor Swift eras. Um, and she has just been forced to retire from her job that she's been doing her whole life. She's been lying about her age. She gets found out and she's a little bit humiliated, but she agrees to retire at last. And she moves to Florida, as one does sometimes, to an active sort of senior community. And she's a swimmer. She does her laps every day. And the very first day there, she gets out of the pool and someone calls her childhood nickname from over her shoulder. She hears it. And she has really only let 2 people in her life call her that name. She doesn't like it. She turns around and there he is, Irving Rifkin, the man who was the delivery boy at her father's pharmacy and the man who broke her heart 60 years earlier. And she is not happy to see him. And he is wildly overjoyed to see her. So, in order to find out, their history and what went wrong and sort of all of the paths that Augusta chose in her life, I take you back to 1920s Brooklyn. So this is a dual timeline story, and we're in 1920s Brooklyn in the world of Stern's pharmacy, Augusta's father's pharmacy, where the family lives over the store. And then we're in 1980s Boca Raton. So it's a lot of fun because they're two wildly different worlds. But Augusta is, very present in both of them. First, as a hopeful young woman who is sort of caught between her father's way of doing things, fascinated by his role as the community pharmacist, fascinated by the science and all of that, but also very interested in her great Aunt Esther's method of healing. And Aunt Esther has come to stay with them because her mother has died. So she's sort of there to make sure meals get put on the table and the house gets run. But she too is a healer, and she has a very distinct way of doing things, which involves a lot of chicken soup and a lot of midnight powder making, in by the moonlight in the kitchen that Augusta is privy to. And it's really, that's Augusta's, she's faced with these two worlds that she has to she wants to combine them. She wants to take the best of both of them, but something happens and she can't. She chooses only one. And when we see her, you know, when she's about to turn 80, she's been living her life for 60 years, shutting out her Aunt Esther's world, shutting out,
Mhm.
that sort of sparkly world, shutting out the magic in life, the very real magic of just believing and love and all of that. And she's taken a different path. So the story is about all the mistakes that we can make when we're young and all the
Mhm.
consequences that show up when we're old. I leave out middle age because that's sort of not so interesting to me. I'm in middle age. I don't want to write about that. I'd rather write about youth and older people. So it was a really fun book to write.
And Augusta, our title character, is named for your husband's great grandmother. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yes. Yes.
Can
Yes,
you?
she is. Yeah. So even like before, when I first started dating my husband, from the earliest stages, I had heard about his great grandmother. There was a needlepoint pillow that his mom kept in their house, and it was a needlepoint pillow of Goldie. Her nickname, I thought her name was Goldie. I didn't even know that her name was Augusta until I started researching this book. So her
Wow.
name was Goldie, and she had red hair, reddish blondish hair, and the needlepoint pillow showed her in a pharmacy coat, and it had all of her degrees and different things. But she was married to a pharmacist. He died very suddenly, very young. She had a 2-year-old child, and she went to pharmacy school and graduated from Fordham Pharmacy School in 1921 so she could keep the store and take care of her daughter. And she had that store for many decades until the neighborhood sort of turned, very similar to Augusta in the book. And then she became a hospital pharmacist, and she worked at various hospitals. But she lied about her age. Remember whiteout? I always say, remember whiteout? Like my father-in-law apparently used to white out like her pharmaceutical like certificate, her diploma, whatever, white out the thing and type in a different year and then photocopy it, and like you could get away with it back then.
Wow.
So she worked into her 80s. I mean, that's sort of a nightmare now when you think about it. Apparently, she was very sharp and she never like miscalculated or gave anyone the wrong medicine, but like it's a little scary to think about if something had gone wrong. But anyway, yeah, so I've always been fascinated with her story. And I actually have, this was her mortar and pestle, which
Oh, wow.
which my mother-in-law has let me keep on my desk as I've been writing this story, but she keeps asking for it back now.
Oh.
I keep doing like, can I just have it for a little bit longer because I want to show people the mortar and pestle. So I'm keeping it for a little bit as long as I can.
Oh, that'll be hard to part with.
Yeah, it will. It's kind of a very inspiring thing to have here. So that's
And
been.
your father was also an inspiration
Yeah.
for this
So
book.
the thing is, I always wanted to write that pharmacy setting. And
Hmm.
I love the idea of a female pharmacist, but that's not enough to write a book. You can't just
Hmm.
say, I like this setting and I like this idea for a job, for a character. You need a world, you need to build conflict and just reasons for writing the story. And so in 2021, my father took a fall, ended up getting very ill. He was 85 at the time. After a summer of kind of trying to figure out how best to care for him, my brother and I decided he really should move to an assisted living place because he really needed 24-hour care. Um, so he lived in Florida, and I went and looked at assisted living places with him. He was very reluctant, but then when he saw what they were, that they're actually these really vibrant places, if you find the right one. And they weren't like the nursing homes that he remembered like visiting his grandparents in. Like these were places with lots of activities and, all kinds of stuff. So,
Mhm.
so he agreed to do that. And I moved him there and I would visit him and sit with him in the lobby, this lobby area, like outside the dining room where everyone would congregate and I would watch the goings on and listen to the conversations. And it was honestly like being in a middle school cafeteria. And, he like my mom died 16 years before my dad. So we lost him last year. But for 15 years, he dated. I mean, he dated all the time. He had like long-term girlfriends. And the last relationship he had ended right before he moved to assisted living. But that did not deter him. Like he had a walker. He just was not phased. He was looking for companionship. He was looking for love, and they all were. And so when I was there with my dad, that was when the story sort of came to me, and I could sort of listen to these people talking and started to hear the voices of my characters for this book in my head. So it's a very nice thing because this book kind of came from both my family and my husband's family. And I dedicated it actually to his father and my father, and they died a year apart. So we lost my father-in-law 2 years ago, and we lost my dad a year ago. And it's just a special story to me for that reason, because I feel like not that my dad is Irving, because he's not, but there's little bits of Irving that are a little like my dad, and there are little bits of Nathaniel that are more like my husband's dad, and it's just sort of it makes me happy to think about them, you know.
Yeah, what a wonderful way to honor them.
Yeah, hanging out up there.
Yeah. They're
So
reading it.
hopefully, yeah.
We mentioned the setting, the dual timeline. So we have Brooklyn in the 1920s and Florida in like the late 1980s. What drew you to these particular settings in these particular times?
So when I was thinking about the whole pharmacy thing and how I was going to set um, and when I was going to set the story, I started reading a lot of memoirs by
Mm.
pharmacists and stories. I read a book that someone had written about his father's years as a pharmacist. And then I read these compilations of sort of little anecdotes um, where a lot of different pharmacists had told a little bit about their world. And then I looked at magazines, American Druggist, all of these things from the 20s and 30s, and just kind of to see what was being sold, what just kind of, when you go through magazines like that, you can just get a sense of atmosphere. And
Yeah.
then I read something about prohibition. And I'm very drawn to gangster stories. Like
Mm.
I don't know, I had a gangster in my family. I had like my an uncle, a great uncle who was a bookie, according to family legend anyway. He was a bookie in Brooklyn. And so all of my stories kind of have a lot of my stories have a little bit of a gangster character in there. And I read this article about it was like from the Saturday Evening Post, and it was like how to start a bootleg, like how you did it, like why pharmacies were important back then, because they were one of the few places that could sell alcohol legally. Whiskey could be prescribed, and you could get a pint every some things said a week or every 10 days you could get a pint of whiskey, and they got the good stuff. They got the real bonded, like real whiskey, not like
Wow.
the dreck that was being made during prohibition. And so it became a very big lure for gangsters. And some of them would like start their own fake pharmacies that never existed as brick and mortar stores, but were like on paper. And they would get these certificates. And then when the government started to crack down on that, they would like insert themselves into actual pharmacies, and make fake
Mm.
prescriptions to get the alcohol, or just flat out steal the deliveries, just whatever they wanted to do. And so when I read about that time period just became really interesting to me, the 20s, and just the whole soda counter culture, people
Yeah.
sitting there getting their ice cream and their ice cream sodas and all of that. There was just there was a lot, I felt like there was a lot to work with, and it made it interesting. And then, of course, my husband's great grandmother she did graduate in 1921, so I felt like I that was sort of part of it too. I was looking to see if that timeline would work, if that decade would be an interesting one, and of course it really was. And
Mhm.
then the later timeline follows the first, right? Because like she can't live to be 112. Like I can't make it present day. because
Yeah.
it's not feasible. So it sort of followed from that.
And then how did you research for the late 1980s
Yeah, the Florida
retirement
part. I
culture in
think that,
Florida?
yeah, that I knew a little more about. You know, my husband's parents have had a place in Florida for a really long time.
Mm.
My dad was in Florida, but I wasn't in Florida in the 80s, but like there was a restaurant that I had gone to. I used the restaurant in the story. It's since closed, but this fancy restaurant that a big crucial scene takes place in at the end of the book. And I had been to that restaurant and it had been around for a long time. Um, and I just kind of I talked to a lot of people. I mean, I talked to a lot of pharmacists too, I should say. Like I talked to um, the father of my local pharmacist who is still practicing as a pharmacist like in his 80s, and he told me a lot. But for the Florida piece, it was sort of that's lighter research kind of. It's, you know, I was looking in like old issues of the Palm Beach Post trying to figure out where the symphony was because it wasn't where it is now, trying to figure out if this restaurant existed, sort of like all the foods that they were eating. There's some crucial jello mold situations in the book. um, you know, like all those sorts of things. Checking out, there's some tennis scenes and like who were the tennis players then and what were people wearing on a tennis court, like what were the fashions and things like that. Um, but I had enough anecdotal kind of like details from friends who had visited their grandparents there in the 80s. I didn't, but I know a lot enough people who did, and they talked to me a lot about what it was like.
I'm always interested in hearing how authors work with dual timelines. So, how do you do it? Do you go through and write all the way through one timeline and then sort of go back and do the other, or are you constantly going back and forth between the two as you're working?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I have to write my books, regardless of whether they are a dual timeline or not, in the order that you read them. I cannot do it any other
Wow.
way. I can't, I feel like I need to experience the story and grow with the story the way the reader experiences it and the
Mm.
characters grow. And I have tried many times to not do that, but it is to no avail. I cannot do it any other way because it does make for slow. It's slow. So for a dual timeline story, I force myself to stop. I think that it does make it makes for very fluid transitions. I really try as I'm writing to pick moments when I start to write a chapter in the 1920s timeline. I know what's how it's going to end, and I know that I want that ending to somehow have a nice smooth transition to what happens then in the later timeline. So like if it's raining, it's going to be raining then in the later
Mhm.
timeline or whatever it might be. I try to find connection points and try to
Mhm.
find things to join together the two timelines that whether it's language, whether it's atmospheric, whether it's just something, some tidbit that makes the transition make sense and makes you flow right into it. It makes for a longer process because you know when the greatest I feel like the one of the greatest compliments that I can get is when readers will say to me, so often with a dual timeline book, I like one so much more than the other. And I just skim one to get to the one that I like,
Mm.
you know. But in your book, I loved both equally. And to me, that's the greatest
Mhm.
compliment because I feel that way with Augusta and in The Matchmaker's Gift, which was also a dual timeline. I felt that way. Um, but it is the case that even when you love them both, when you're reading, you you're like really into 1920s, right? And something's
Mhm.
happening and then it stops and it goes to the 1980s and then you're like, "Oh, I kind of wanted to keep reading in this." And it's that way with writing also. Like I will be writing, you know, Augusta as a young woman and I get so into it and I think, "Well, I could just write her next chapter. Why don't I just?" But I always made myself stop. And it was hard sometimes to make myself stop, but I knew that the transitions would be better. And even how could I really know what's going to happen in the next chapter unless I write the one before it first? Because even though they're split timelines, there are little clues and little things that are going on. Because this story, I wouldn't call it a mystery, but there is a mystery involved of what happened, like what happened in 1920s Brooklyn to cause Augusta to feel this way, and what happened between her and Irving, and what happened with with Esther's teachings and all the things that are going on. And there's a mistake that she makes when she's young that she very nearly repeats when she gets older, and or does repeat sort of. And I wanted that. I wanted it to be kind of tragic in the first instance, but funny in the second instance. And I had to, I had to write my way through it. I couldn't just jump around.
Yeah. What is your process like? What does it look like from when you get that germ of an idea for a
Mhm.
new book? What happens next?
I'm super slow. It depends, sometimes, I mean, so this book has a lot of romantic elements in it, but it is historical. So the research, I get this idea, I have sort of a vague idea for a plot, and then I start researching. And the research is very exploratory and it goes in 1,000 different directions. And I'm looking for inspiration and for nuggets. So like the the whole prohibition piece was an inspiration. There was in the memoirs that I read about pharmacists, there were things that I used and things that I didn't use. One thing that I thought was fascinating was reading about the night bell, how like there was always a night bell at a pharmacy and people would ring it, and sometimes someone described how someone rang it for like stamps at like woke him up in the middle of the night and wanted a 2 cent stamp. So that kind of thing, I think like wow, that's a great detail. I love that detail. There were a lot of pharmacists who talked about sort of the need to know their customers really well, and because they might ask for something that they knew that they wanted to use to kill themselves, like the arsenic, or to kill their spouse, to kill like they and so there was a lot of talk of that. So there are those kind of details that you read about. I read something about these show globes that were these big globes of liquid of different colors that pharmacies would hang in the windows, and that's how you would know there was a pharmacy there. And I thought that was a beautiful detail that I wanted to put in. And then, but this, like, it wasn't just pharmacy, it was pharmacy research, but then it was like I had to do a lot of research on herbalism and
Mm.
like Jewish magic and Jewish herbalism and like love magic and all these love magic in different cultures. And I found something called, I found this like, I don't even know what it was. There's like academic papers on these things called these incantation bowls, which were like in 600 AD. Then they found them in like what used to be Iran and Iraq, and they had
Wow.
Aramaic and Hebrew and all these different um, like writings on them. And they would be a bowl, and the writing would be swirled on the inside of the bowl, and the bowl would be buried under a house or under a cemetery or under like a house of worship, and it would be buried upside down in the dirt. And the
Wow.
writing was like a protection spell or something that was meant to protect. Sometimes they were Bible verses, whatever, meant to protect the people in the house or the person who was buried in the cemetery or whatever it was. And several of them have been found. And so I read that. I found that because I was looking for magic things and
Mhm.
amulets and things like that. And so these incantation bowls were really interesting to me. And that's why in this book I have Esther's mortar, the bowl of the mortar has words swirled in,
Mhm.
and because I've never seen that before, but it's just that inspired that detail in the book. So it's like like that, like how did I stumble on this weird like fact and paper academic stuff? But you find things, as you're. So I let my research really go all over the place, and it's a lot of fun. I go down a lot of paths, and that takes a couple months, and I kind of take notes of just the things that I'm excited about, these little details that I'm excited about, and then I go to sort of get the story together. And I know where it begins and I know where it ends, and I kind of know like the dramatic scenes, the stopping points along the way, but I don't know every little thing, and I don't really outline very much until I need to get the first chapter. The first 50 pages are agony. It's like getting the voices right, getting the setup
Mm.
right. And
Mhm.
then once I have that, then I start outlining. And I outline, but it doesn't look like it's just like a list on a piece of paper. It's like things that I want to happen. And then
Mhm.
as I get further into the story, when I'm about halfway, then I really start to more specific lists. And the lists get more specific as I have less time to get everything wrapped up in the story. So when I have 50 pages left, I have a very specific outline-ish kind of thing that
Mhm.
the things I need to get in there before I'm done.
When you're doing those first 50 pages, is it is the agony just getting the story out, or are you heavily revising at
Oh,
that
I
time? Like,
revise and revise and revise and revise. I do not do a messy first draft. My first draft
wow.
will read like a book. Um, my first book, The Two Family House, was really not edited very much at all. And The Matchmaker's Gift, I have a different editor. I love my editor now, Sarah
Mhm.
Canton. She's amazing. The Matchmaker's Gift didn't have too much editing. The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern had more editing, more things that she wanted me to add. But the overall thing didn't change that much. But I do send her, like after I write the first 100 pages, I send it because I don't want to write. I but I every day I write sentences and delete them, and I write and delete and I write. Like it's just I self edit the whole way through, which is very terrible, and I do not recommend it. But it's just I can't do it any other way. I wish I wasn't like this, but I just
Are
am.
you sitting at your, what's the daily writing routine like? Do you give yourself a
So
specific amount of time to be at your desk, or?
it really depends. When I'm really into the book, and if I have a contract for it, and I have a deadline,
Mhm.
then I kind of make charts of like how much I need to write every day. And I will I like to write in the morning and the early afternoon, but I don't have kids at home anymore, so I can really write all the time. And so I some days I'll write all through the day, kind of.
Mhm.
It just sort of depends. It depends like how focused I am on my exercising at that point. I have a dog, I have to walk the dog a million times a day, I walk him a lot. So it just sort of depends. But I do sit down and I do it. But I don't do it. So this background is like my office, but I don't tend to write a lot here. I do like all my Zooms and things here, and
Mhm.
I do a lot of research here, but I tend to write at my kitchen table because that's like where I am in the morning. That's where I am. I make my
Mhm.
coffee and I just plop myself down there. And my dog is happy there. He sits on the couch like and looks with his head like over the back of the couch and looks at me because it's like a sort of open space. So he just looks at me and I write. And then I kind of just pick up my laptop and move all around during the day. I'll just write wherever I am.
I love that. I find I'm always just sitting weird places or whatever to
Yeah,
write to. And then I always think, does this make me less professional seeming? Since it seems like
right,
everyone has a really nice office, right?
right. I mean, this little section of my office is nice, but like what you can't see is like there's like a treadmill over there. Like, there's like all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's like a nice background. I have a nice little area here. I do like it. This is the room sort of over my garage. So it wasn't always here. And there's like a guest room. We put up a wall and there's like a little guest room and different things here. So if I have a guest staying over, I can't use my office at all because it's sort of part of the area. Because there's like glass double doors, and then you're in the giant space that is over the garage, and then it's broken up. But I can't really. If someone stays, I let them have the whole space.
Kind of you.
Well, I mean, what am I gonna do? It's fine.
What drew you to writing about Jewish mysticism in this book?
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily think of it as Jewish mysticism,
Mm.
but it is. Some of it is. Some of it is more sort of general. Um, I guess it was just the whole idea of the pharmacy setting
Mhm.
that seemed perfect to add magical realism. I wanted to write another book with magical realism. My last book had a touch of it in there, and I really enjoyed writing that. And it's a skill that I'm trying to hone. Like if I could write any book at all, I would write like a middle grade magic book about magic. Like Edward Eger's book Half Magic was just like one of my favorite books of all time. If I could be British and write in that British kind of, like I wish I could do that, but I can't. It just doesn't come out right. But I love little bits of magic in stories. And so with this book, I knew that it would just lend itself to that because you have all these tinctures and powders and, you know, the prescription room with all the different things. But the idea of Esther being someone who was a healer in back
Mhm.
in Russia or Poland or wherever it is exactly that the country was at the time when she came over, really appealed to me. And so I did a lot of research in herbalism, like I said, and mysticism and Jewish mysticism. But in the course of that research, I found out about this plant that I don't even know how I found this, but it's called like, what did they call it? Like a Russian, like a folklore plant. I don't really know if it's a real plant, but it's a plant that they talk about in folklore. And it looks like a four-leaf clover, but it's called Raskolnik or Raskovnik. I have it in the book. Um, and when I read about it, it said that this plant was thought to unlock the mind, unlock things that are
Mm.
closed and open the mind. And so when I read about that specific plant, that really helped me figure out what was going to happen in this book, what the love
Mhm.
elixir would do. So my big joke with this book is like I knew that it was going to be some sort of concoction that had something to do with love, right? I mean, she
Mhm.
makes all kinds of concoctions, and some heal people when they have the flu, and some help women get pregnant. And Esther does a lot for the people in her community. And mostly it's women who just feel really unseen by
Mhm.
their doctors or the male pharmacists. But I didn't want it like it couldn't be a love potion like you give it to someone and they fall in love with someone because that's just like really close to like roofying someone.
Yeah.
Like, and I could not write about somebody being roofied in my books. And so I knew that this potion was going to be not a love potion at all. It was going to do something else. And
Mhm.
so I don't know. That came of that. But the and the idea, like the whole love elixir kind of idea, even though it's not a love elixir, kind of came because in the course of all that pharmacy research, I came across this short story by O. Henry. And if you've ever read like O. Henry short stories, they're sort of famously like quirky and ironic and like they're like little puzzle things that happen. There's like the famous one is the gift of the magi, which is
Mhm.
like there's a couple and they're poor and they want to get each other Christmas presents and they can't afford anything. So he sells his watch to buy her a comb for her hair and she cuts her hair to buy him a gold chain for his watch. And so at the end of the day, that's what happens. So it's like that sort of, the irony of that. And like,
Mhm.
it's a quirky little story. Um, and so the story that I came across was one called The Love Filter of Ike Schonstein. And it's about a pharmacy. And it's like 1920s. And the pharmacy is called the Blue Light Pharmacy. And in the beginning of the story, the narrator says, like, the blue light pharmacy is not a thing of like candy and bric-a-brac. If you want, if you ask it for a painkiller, it will not give you a bonbon. So it was like this really like interesting, quirky language about this pharmacy. And in the story, the pharmacist is in love with this woman, but someone else is too, this customer, and he
Mhm.
asks for a love potion. And it's just this whole funny thing that happens. And I loved the title. And I loved the idea of someone wanting a love potion, but it never really was a love potion at all. And that found its way in the book. And of course, my title is like a great homage to his title. But I didn't think anyone in this day and age would know what a filter was because it's spelled Philtre, which means
Oh,
like an
wow.
elixir. Yeah, it's so, and I knew like I didn't even know what it was. So I saw the title and I was like, what is this about? But when I read the first couple lines about the pharmacy, I had to keep reading it because it was so fascinating. So that's kind of where all the mysticism and I don't know, that stuff came from. It comes from a lot of different places. I always feel like I'm just ramble on and on when people ask me questions because the process is so convoluted and strange. And it's just like, it's never a set recipe. The inspiration comes from so many different places, and there are always all these different paths that a story can take. And it's just every day you choose a certain path, but you could have chosen so many other paths. I could have made the character go, zig instead of zag and found a different plant or a different this or that, and it becomes a whole different story. If I lost everything, if I had lost everything in the book and I had to recreate it, it would probably come out completely different, because I would find other things along the way.
How did you come to writing? Have you always been a writer?
No. um, I've always wanted to be a writer. I was an English major.
Mhm.
I was a lawyer. I never really wanted to be a lawyer, but I was a trust and estates lawyer. I was always drawn to story. I was always drawn to the
Mhm.
family drama, the family stories that the clients had. Never the law to like actually do anything legal, but just like that therapeutic aspect of being a trust and estates lawyer really appealed to me and hearing about people's families and their stories. Um, but no, I never tried to write fiction. I wrote a lot of terrible poetry. And then, but I had, when after my daughter was born, so in 1999, um, I had an idea for, well, actually, she was 6 months old, so it was 2000, and I had an idea for um, a story when she was 6 months old, and that idea became my first novel, The Two Family House. But I didn't write it for like 10 years. Um, my
Wow.
mom, it was really 9 years. My mom died very young, and I was about to turn 40. And I had been telling my friends like bits and pieces of this story and telling it to my husband. And I was always like, well, what if this happened in this, story?
Mhm.
And after my mom died, it was kind of like a push to me that an awareness, of the
Mhm.
brevity of our time here on
Yeah.
this planet. And just like that, if I didn't start writing, I would never write it. So I signed up for a workshop, a class, and I just started writing that book. It took me 5 years to write that book. And then I just got really lucky and I found an agent and I don't know, and it became that the two family house. And um, I never thought anyone would read it. It's never ceases to amaze me that anyone reads anything I write. But there you have it. That's how it happened.
Well, what was that road to publication like? You get out of the work, you work on it for 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you query for a while or
No,
anything?
I had such a lucky, when I say I was lucky, I really mean it. So I took a class at Sarah Lawrence College, which is about like
Mm.
45 minutes from me. And I was pretty much done with the book, though I hadn't really edited it, and I knew I wanted to play around with a little bit and polish it. And there was like a publishing conference that Sarah Lawrence put on, and
Mm.
they invited people to speak. It was a day long conference. It wasn't like a whole weekend. It was one day, and there were editors and there were agents and there were all different people, and they in the morning and early afternoon there were speakers and you could go, and then if you signed up early you could pay like an extra $25 or something and have three pitch sessions, and you could ask for certain people, but I think they kind of assigned you. I don't know, I think you could rank who you wanted to have your pitch sessions with, and you had to give them 10 pages of your work and a synopsis and fill out like this questionnaire. So like one of the things in the questionnaire was, what genre do you write? And like I had no idea. I didn't even know. Like I think I wrote like literary fiction, and one of the people who I met with was super not nice and was like kind of snobby and said, "This is not literary fiction. This is women's fiction," as if it was an insult. Um, but I did not know. I did not know that I wrote historical fiction. It was just, I wrote the story that I had been thinking about for a really long time. I wrote the story
Mhm.
that had been mulling in my head for all those years. And so um, the last person I met with was really enthusiastic. The first one was enthusiastic too. The middle one was not nice. And then the last one was super enthusiastic. And she said, I have not heard a story like this before. And it's just very unique. And I haven't heard it. Is it done? Can you send me the whole manuscript? So I said, can I take like a month and edit it for you? Can I send it to you in a little bit? And I did. I took a month and I didn't know how to edit, but I don't know. I just played around with it.
Mm.
Um, I tried to make it pop more like right from the beginning. And I sent it to her. And I sent it to her like in the morning, and the next day she called me and she said she had been up all night reading it and she finished
Mm.
it and she cried and she loved it and she wanted to be my agent. And then I called my husband and he thought I had like fallen and hit my head in the kitchen. So I have to say, like, that day was like up there with like, the birth of my children, my wedding. Like that was a really,
Yeah.
really special day to hear that someone believed in my story. So then we did the whole like she sent it out. So I never have actually queried, and I feel kind of bad about that, but it's just how it happened,
I
for
don't
me.
think you should feel bad about it. It doesn't sound like luck. It sounds like a lot of hard work just
Well,
done on the front
but
end.
there's always luck. Like there, you know what? Like this is why I like writing magical realism because I really believe there's like a little bit of magic in the world that sometimes,
Mhm.
gets sprinkled your way. And that was a really magical thing. Like to me, that's magic, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not like hocus pocus magic, but it's magic. It just is. So
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
What's your best advice for aspiring authors?
I think you have to keep writing. I mean, you just like this first book, it took me 5 years. And I had my kids were young and it was hard to find time to write and it was hard to even know what I was doing. But I just sort of took it step by step. And I think if you have a story to tell, it's really important to try to tell it. It's a very cathartic thing. It's a way to help process your emotions and I don't know, your past and all of it. Like there's a lot of my family in the two family house. There's a lot of the little funny things that happened to me when I was young that bother me, or I wouldn't say they traumatized me, but
Yeah.
things that I just wanted to think about and write about. And I think if you feel like you want to be writing about something, you have to write it. And it doesn't matter if you've never done it before. I had never done it before. But it's kind of like I sort of, how like they say like everyone has their 5 minutes of fame. I feel like everyone has one story in them at least,
Mhm.
whatever it is, and it's worthwhile. So just, keep at it. But you have to keep at it. It's just even now, like it doesn't matter how long you've been writing for, how many books you have. It's always a slog. It's always hard. It always sounds better in your head. It's easier to just dream about your story than it is to write down the words. Because writing down the words is real work. But you have to force yourself to do it, but you can. And there's no way that it has to look, right? Like you were saying, like you wonder if you move your laptop and you're sitting on the couch like with your feet up or whatever, is that like, are you a writer then if you're doing that? Like it took me forever before I had a publishing contract and I didn't tell anyone. And I didn't tell anyone until it first came out like on the internet. My husband was like someone who kept Googling me, like, which I didn't even think to do. And I had this contract, but it takes so long. The road to a book, especially, it takes so long. So the book, I got the agent in August. The book was sold in November. The book didn't come out. It wasn't on shelves until not that March, but the following March. So it was such a long time. So I had this contract in, let's say December, but it wasn't for a year and a quarter until the book came out. And for a year, I did not tell anyone because I did not
Wow.
trust necessarily that it would happen. I did not really feel comfortable calling myself a writer, and then one day my husband was doing his Google thing, and he was like, oh gosh, like look, it was, it's like written up in some like anticipated something or other. And he was like, and then I had to tell everyone. I was like, I guess I got to tell everyone. It's like when you're pregnant, you don't want to tell
Yeah.
anybody until a certain amount of time goes by. It felt like that. So I would say you have to write and you have to take yourself seriously and you have to call yourself a writer and you have to think of yourself as a writer because if you don't, nobody else will. You have to have that inner confidence, which is really hard.
Traditional last question of this podcast.
Sure.
When the love elixir of Augusta Stern is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, the theme song. Mm. There's this song that I think it's on the Ella Enchanted album, like the that soundtrack. So I'll steal it from that. But it's that song, "Oh, oh, oh, it's magic." You know that song? Like I
Yes,
love that song.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great song.
Yes, that would be
Love
great.
the song, yeah. But there's also like a lot of the songs like from the When Harry Met Sally soundtrack, like about love and like New Yorky love songs that It Had to Be You, all those kind of old sort of songs that would be nice too. I would put that on the soundtrack too, for
That'd be
sure.
great.
A little Harry Connick Jr. kind of.
Yeah.
I
I'm
put
ready
those
for
on
it.
there. Yeah, I put those on there too.
Lynda Cohen Loigman, thank you so much for being here. It has been a joy getting to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you. I love chatting with you.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.